This podcast episode of RealAg Radio is brought to you by Authority Strike Herbicide from FMC. With just one application, Authority Strike gives you a strong start with a powerful one-pass burn-off and keeps working later with extended weed control. Stop by your local retailer or visit ag.fmc.com/ca to learn more.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. Thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. Of course, big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. We will have a bonus segment for all of you podcast listeners today for sure, so stay tuned for that. And if you don't download the RealAg Radio podcast, make sure you check it out. We're doing bonus segments all the time, extended segments as well, the longer form of some of the interviews we put on the show. Today, we've got a great one. We've got Drew Lerner from World Weather Inc. here to talk about some of the weather conditions we can expect in 2025, not only for central, eastern, and western Canada, but also the U.S., really kind of looking at this as from a North American perspective. And I was able to catch up with Drew at the Top Producer Summit earlier this week. We're also going to have a RealAg Issues Panel. Kelvin Heppner, Lyndsey Smith will be in attendance and be here. We got a lot of things to talk about. And, of course, the big hockey game last night. Oh, can you talk about a country at one time just having a deep breath of relief, So, yeah, what a game, though. It's funny. I texted a friend right before I'm in Denver, Colorado for watching my two boys play college baseball this weekend. And so I had the ESPN feed, and I texted my friend this right before Messier said it. These two teams could play 100 times, and it'd be a 50-50 split. Very even. There's some things that Canada did better, some things the U.S. does better, but they are essentially built the exact same way. Like, the Americans play Canadian hockey pretty good. It is now a North American style of hockey, and what an entertaining game. It really was fantastic. But just looking at this a little bit deeper, there's a lot of metaphor here to what's happening right now between Canada-U.S. relations. You look at this tournament. Canada loses early. They sneak by the Swedes. They tried to lose a game they had totally in their control. Then on the Saturday night, they lose a heartbreaking game in Montreal to the Americans, who really dominated. So Canada loses early in the tournament. Canada's future as a hockey power looks incredibly bleak. The American team is confident. They're boisterous. They seem willing and capable of just taking the game away from our Canadian hands. Essentially, if America takes over hockey, it's essentially taking one of the biggest pieces of a Canadian identity that we have. As a result, Canada gets emotional. They feel threatened, and they do uncharacteristically Canadian things like booing the U.S. anthem, which some of you, I know from some of the feedback, very upset about. Well, I definitely heard from the American audience, and definitely heard from some Canadians that were upset about that as well. But also Canadians getting tired of hearing about the 51st state. And at a moment when the U.S. is pushing in overtime, in a great game, the overtime was totally in control of Team USA. And Team USA seemed destined to win this game on home soil in Boston. It didn't look good for the Canadians. And then a tremendous goaltending effort, a couple fabulous saves being made by a goalie that a lot of Canadians had really counted out earlier in the tournament. Austin Matthews, captain of the Leafs, captain of the USA team, just robbed 2 or 3 times in overtime. And then the best player in the world, a truly understated personality, somebody that had really played quite terrible throughout the entire hockey game, and actually admitted it in the post-game interview how bad he was, and he had to continue to push through. Connor McDavid finds a way to get the puck past Hellebuck, and the entire country of Canada breathes a sigh of relief. There's a lot of metaphors and analogies to take out of what happened last night in the hockey game, and we don't know what the fate is yet between the Canada-U.S. relationship, but we know this. We know this. Canada won a very, very important hockey game to the country, and the coach brought it up after the game, talking about the weight the players felt for not just for themselves in the dressing room, but for the entire country. So go Team Canada, great hockey game, and I think everybody in Canada and the U.S. very much enjoyed it. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to get to Drew Lerner. He is with World Weather Inc. and he's giving us a weather forecast right after.
Growing corn? With Envita, you can cut your nitrogen and maintain yield, or maintain nitrogen and increase yield. Envita takes nitrogen from the air and turns it into nitrogen for your corn. It provides a right place, right time source of nitrogen to maximize your yield. Farmers who use Envita see healthier plants, bigger cobs, and less tip-back. Envita is guaranteed to add more bushels to every treated acre. Start growing with Envita. Visit azotic.com to learn more. That's azotic.com.
It's time for our product spotlight. Joining me now, it's Chad Yanchiski, sales manager for FP Genetics. What's got you really jazzed up about varieties for this year?
One of our big varieties is AAC Synergies, a tried and true variety that people are well aware of. Great for malt, great malt acceptance. Kind of that number one malt acre right now, so a really nice yield package to it. And I think what you're going to see with it, it's going to continue to be that number one malt acre variety on the market for the next, 4 or 5 years. When I look into durum, we've got the first ever I-rated durum that hit the market, so it's an intermediate rating for Fusarium, and that one's super exciting because it's the first one that's ever been an I-rated durum in the world.
Where can farmers go for more information about these genetics, agronomic support as well, of how to make that choice on which one of these is the best fit for their farm?
So our website's probably the best spot, fpgenetics.ca. You can reach out to anybody at FP. We're all pretty well versed on our portfolio and varieties, and so sitting down, booking a meeting with us to really go over what your goals are for your farm will really help us pick that variety that's gonna suit your farm the best.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. This segment's brought to you by Alpine Liquid Fertilizers, your full-season crop fertility specialist from start to finish. Make sure you check out for this spring Alpine Liquid Fertilizers. Okay, let's now talk about the weather here a little bit because, a lot of us are thinking about what are the spring conditions going to be? What does summer have in store for us as we try to get this crop into the bin? You think about Western Canada last year, great start, and then Mother Nature just quit on us. And it really impacted at the end of the day what some of the production numbers were. A lot of concern in parts of the Midwest this year about how dry it is. It has been really winter wonderland in parts of Eastern Canada as well. So we chatted this week at Top Producer Summit with Drew Lerner of World Weather Inc.
Kansas City, Missouri, and we're joined by longtime friend of RealAgriculture and a local here in Kansas City. It is Drew Lerner. Drew, how are we doing?
I'm good. It's good to have you on my turf for a change.
Yeah, that is very correct. The weather, man. First of all, locally here, it's been cold in Missouri. What is going on?
Yeah, I was up in Canada a week ago, and I think it all came with me.
It's your fault.
Yeah, it was, minus 31, and I was in Edmonton.
Yeah.
And it was very cold. But, all this is coming from up your way, and for this part of the world, they don't like it,
No.
And here we've got more moisture in the air, so when we get cold in this part of the world, it hurts a little bit more. I love your cold. I hate this cold.
I've got two sons that are in North Dakota going to school, and it was minus 38 yesterday, which, of course, at minus 40, that's where Fahrenheit and Celsius connect.
That's right.
It's cold either country when it's that cold.
That's right.
I guess you look at the overall North American weather pattern heading into spring here.
Yeah.
Optimistic, concerned, just kind of give us the lowdown here.
It really depends on where we are talking about. I'm very excited about Canada this year, at least in the southwestern prairies. I think we're at the end of the 8-year drought, and we're going to get some break. Now, we'll go back and forth a little bit this year, but I think it's going to get better up there. It's going to get better in the northern plains for a little while as well, probably in the spring. I don't know that we can take it all the way through the summer, but nonetheless, better situation for those guys. In the U.S., here in the central part of the country, there's a potential we might get a little dry a little later in the year. You know, we're not doing real well on moisture in this part of the world right now.
Yeah.
And that cold air that comes in from Canada, you know, there's no moisture up there, up your way. So when it comes down in this part of the world, it doesn't bring any moisture. So places like Iowa and Minnesota and Nebraska and neighboring areas are really running a little short on moisture. And there's still a drought prevailing in some of those areas. The longer we keep the northwesterly flow going, the higher the potential is that we're going to come into spring dry in some of these areas. My concern is once the cold air runs out, Mother Nature will switch it around and we'll get really warm. And if there's not a good transitional period there, we could go into warm and dry instead of cold and dry.
A lot of ranchers on the western half of the U.S. What do you see on that side of the country?
Yeah, you know, I think that from a ranching perspective, most of the situation right now is a little tenuous. I think there's been a lot of yakety-yak about the La Nina and negative PDO and it being dry out there. And, you know, but we got to keep in mind that it did rain fairly well in November last year. And so there's moisture down deep in the ground. We just need a one or two storm system to come across the area, moisten up that topsoil, and we're going to end up with much better grazing conditions. But that's the big concern. That northwest flow isn't going to help generate that very well.
Northeast and, I should say central and eastern Canada. What's your, early prognosis there?
A lot of cold still yet to come.
Really?
Yeah.
'Cause they've had a lot of snow, Drew.
Yeah, I know. Ontario, Quebec, I think it's going to be kind of a challenging spring. A lot of cold air coming at times. We'll warm up and then we'll get cold again. I'm afraid we may get some false starts on some of the crop.
Ooh, that could be chilly. That could be chilly for corn.
It could be chilly for corn. It'd be a little delay in planting. It could also hurt some of the wheat crop if it gets going a little bit too soon. So I'm a little concerned about that part of Canada. For the prairies, I think prairies, it's going to be a good mix. There is a potential for some dryness in the eastern part of the area.
So when I've talked to some other people that are providing weather forecasts, I'm sorry I cheated on you.
I'm hurt. I'm really hurt.
One of the things that I have heard, I'm curious on whether you agree with it or not, is Western Canada will have moisture early, but concerned about an early shutoff, earlier than last year, potentially. Do you see it differently?
It could be that way, but I don't think so. I think it'll be similar to last year. We will do well in the spring. We will be wetter than we were last year in the spring in parts of the region.
Prairies will take that.
Yeah, I know they can. Especially the area that I think will be wettest is going to be the area that's been driest. So they'll absorb that and really do well with it. But there could be a little bit of planting delay, and so that may get some people a little bit worked up. But yeah, I do think there's a potential for some dryness later in the year. Right now, the way it looks to me, the northeast half of Saskatchewan and Manitoba probably have the biggest risk of being a little dry bias as we get into the heart of summer. A lot depends on what happens to the dryness in the states. Because if we end up with a dry spring here, conditions in the atmosphere are going to support ridge building, and it may end up being more in the middle of North America because of that dry bias. And so that could work its way up and hit eastern parts of the prairies.
So when we have ridge building, is that a situation where it locks in the condition, or what happens when you say ridge building?
Yeah, there's just an ordinary ridge that comes and goes, and then there's the big super ridges that do lock in for a long period of time. Those years that we get the super ridges that are really intense, they get locked in. Usually pretty unique situations. A lot of the drought years we've had here recently in the western part of Canada, was part of a blocking weather pattern. The year ahead looks a little less blocky for Canada, but more so maybe in the U.S. plains. So the top of the ridge will get wiped out once in a while, and that'll bring rain to the prairies, while the base of the ridge over the plains and western Corn Belt might cause more persistent dryness.
Hey, in the Midwest, dry August, back into the growing season, not great for soybeans, and we'll be asking questions about, does the corn have enough to get to the end?
Right. Right now we're a little concerned about whether that would be the case on corn because of this drier bias that's already in Iowa and Nebraska and some neighboring states. There is a drought that's still underway. With the northwest flow, we're not getting good storm systems. Now, when we warm up here, probably in April, we'll get a couple of storms that will come along and bring some moisture, which will help the planting, but it's not going to fix the deep subsoil moisture deficits. And that sets the stage for drier bias later in the summer, maybe.
Is there a year I love these. Like, I love asking, is there a year that this reminds you of from our past?
You know, not anything that jumps off the charts, but there are a number of years that I'm looking at. Years like 1971, 2007, I believe 1989 and 1953. Those are all years that I'm looking at, and there's a 1968 thrown in there too. I know I'm just blowing these years.
53, a good year. My parents were born in 53. Was it a good year for crops?
In Canada, it was wet. It was pretty wet, especially in the spring, and the U.S. had a drier bias, and that's why 53 kind of looks a little bit interesting right now. It wasn't just crazy wet all the way through the prairies all summer long, but it was a wetter year. And I tend to not want to go fully with 1953, but a piece of it, a flavor of it, might come with us.
And that's an important caveat, is that those are like guidelines. There's a potential for the setup for those years to be similar to this year, but don't take it as like the gospel in terms of it rained on the June 15th of 53, so therefore it will in 2025.
Yeah, you don't want to do that.
Yeah.
These are just guidances. We look for something. Weather does repeat itself, but doesn't get the specifics.
Yeah.
So.
To wrap up, what's the piece that you're the most interested in following this year?
Two things. Number one, this weak La Nina, it absolutely has to go away, and it looks like it will. It looks like it'll be gone by the time we get into the end of March, and we're already seeing it weaken. So I think that's going to be okay. The other thing is the negative phase of Pacific Decadal Oscillation, which has to do with cool water off the west coast of North America and then much warmer water further west. And in that scenario, we talked about the ridge possibly building up in the middle of North America. That promotes ridginess in the middle of North America in some years, especially years where La Nina sticks around. So if La Nina doesn't go away and we keep this negative PDO in place, the potential for getting a hot, dry scenario in the middle of North America becomes much higher. But I think we're going to lose La Nina, and we're going to get a part of this, but it's not going to be the big bad disaster, I hope, that we've seen in the past. So, but that's what I'm watching most closely right now.
Drew, if somebody wants some information on your newsletter, pitch it. Let's hear about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Go to our website, www.worldweather.cc. Be careful not to go to .com. There is no .com for this me.
Those imposters.
CC. Yeah, imposters.
Big thanks to Drew Lerner of World Weather Inc. for joining me here for this interview. And of course, he's been doing interviews with us for so long. Drew Lerner is one of the great guys in agriculture. Hey, fill up at your local co-op for the seeding season. With full tanks, you can avoid the rush and start your field work at the earliest moment possible. Plus, with the Spring Early Delivery Program, you can save time and free up cash flow. Make sure you talk to your local fuel co-op team member today to arrange for an early on-farm delivery and ensure you are fueled up for spring. We'll be right back on RealAg Radio right after this.
If you grow soy or edible beans in Ontario, you know that Sclerotinia white mold is no joke. Yield loss can be devastating, and timing fungicides can be complicated, but did you know there's a new seed treatment that can help mitigate yield loss? Start the year off with your best foot forward against disease. Ask your seed supplier or local Agrimart group to pre-treat your beans with Heads Up. Part of a complete white mold management plan, ask your seed dealer about Heads Up today or visit headsupst.com.
Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada.
Find everything you need for outstanding weed control in your wheat and barley from the cross-spectrum herbicide experts at Corteva. Corteva is proud to offer a wide selection of cross-spectrum herbicides for maximum convenience, effective resistance management, and customized control of your toughest grassy and broadleaf weeds. No matter what kind of weed challenges you're experiencing, we've got the right fit for your farm. Visit Corteva.ca to learn more.
Let's get going with the RealAg Issues Panel here on RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147. This segment's brought to you by Blackhawk EVO from New Farm. Blackhawk EVO is the next evolution in pre-seed burn-down herbicides powered by Duplasm technology. Blackhawk EVO delivers fast, flexible, and complete control of early germinating and winter annual broadleaf weeds. Find out more by going to newfarm.ca. Let's bring in the panel. Up first, it is Kelvin Heppner coming out of Altona, Manitoba. Kelvin, how are we doing?
Oh, doing well here, Shaun. The sun is shining. Temperatures are warming up. We're breaking out of a long-term deep freeze here again, and of course, we saw the result we wanted to see in that hockey game last night.
Absolutely, we did. No kidding. Yeah, it's people get. This is the point in the year, Kelvin, where people get a little bit tired of winter. This is like we're at that point. Oh, but I know you love winter, so maybe you're different.
I love winter, but it does get old. I like when it starts warming up, it is refreshing, and we actually have some above freezing temperatures in the forecast here on the weekend, which I'd rather it stay below freezing just for road conditions, travel, and storms and everything that usually comes with that fluctuation. But spring is around the corner. You can tell the sun is already quite a bit warmer than what it was a few weeks ago.
Yeah, well, and we heard Drew Lerner from World Weather Inc. here just a little bit before we came on here, and Lyndsey Smith out of Ottawa, Ontario. Lyndsey, your winter seems like it's going to last a little bit longer.
Yeah, one of those, like, thanks, Drew, for nothing. That's what that one was. I listened to it, and he sort of confirmed what I was already feeling, because especially after this past week of we had 2 back-to-back snowstorms. We now have this giant snowpack. We actually aren't even warming up as much as Manitoba is this week. It is going to get a little nicer, but really not that nice. And then Drew comes out with this, hey, it's going to be a cold, late spring potentially. And I was like, I knew it, but I didn't want to hear it. So thanks a lot. Anyway, we are all, I will say, we don't have it as bad. I do really feel for plenty of my friends down on the Bruce Peninsula, etc. Like, they have had lake effect snow all winter, and they are honestly like 10, 12-foot tall snowbanks that they're dealing with. It is absolutely insane. And of course, Western Canada has had extreme cold. So on the grand scheme of things, is it that bad? No. Am I ready for it to be over? Absolutely. So yeah.
Well, I'm sitting in Denver, Colorado right now, and we're supposed to be watching a weekend of college baseball, but I don't know, they got like 3-4 inches of snow last night, so not sure if there's going to be a game today, but it is a turf field, so they can plow it off. That's the benefit of a turf field, but yeah, it doesn't look very good for today, at least below freezing temperatures. Nothing like a 93 mile an hour fastball off the hands with an aluminum bat to just sort of rattle your whole cage. Indeed. So, Kelvin, you mentioned the game. So, what's our takeaway? So, I guess we should talk about the hockey game, not leave it to the back here. We better get to this.
Yeah, well, certainly great for the game of hockey. All the attention that this game received, not just inside the normal NHL bubble, but extending beyond that to sports fans across the U.S. is based on what I've been seeing on social media and on television, and of course, when the president gets involved and becomes a geopolitical type of thing as well, and with the ongoing tension between Canada and the U.S. with the Trump administration on the trade side of things, certainly this game, I think in many ways will go down in history, and in Canadian history especially. I grew up in a household here where the 1972 Summit Series is something I heard about often and learned all about from my dad. It was a momentous event in his life. And so we have books and movies about the 72 series and Paul Henderson scoring with 34 seconds left against the USSR, against the Soviets. And I think, and the U.S., of course, has the whole Miracle on Ice, and that was referenced a lot this week. And I think this game is maybe the second most geopolitically important hockey game in Canadian history. It was just a hockey game. It was just a hockey tournament. But in terms of how Canadians feel after that, after the continuous threats, the references to 51st states and annexation and all that type of stuff, I think Canadians certainly, it's again, just a sport, just a game, but it certainly boosts morale, I think, across Canada.
Yeah, even in the press house or the White House press briefing in the morning, there was a laying on of
the press secretary referred to the 51st state and Canada
becoming the 51st state, and hopefully the U.S. defeating our upcoming 51st state kind of thing. And yeah, certainly, I don't know, those types of references are becoming quite unacceptable in my opinion, and unbecoming. And so yeah, certainly, I think a lot of Canadians have some pent up emotion about that type of thing that perhaps had some release with that McDavid goal last night in overtime.
Yeah, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, right after the goal scored by McDavid, he tweeted, "You can't take our country and you can't take our game." So the Prime Minister talking some smack there back to our friends south of the border, Lyndsey.
Yes, and quickly followed by many people saying, "Where was this Prime Minister 6 years ago?" But anyway, he is, of course, on his way out. But it is, I think, to Kelvin's point, we are at a incredibly emotionally charged, a very politically charged point. And I think all of us in Canada needed this, whether we knew it or not, wanted this very badly. And I'd hate to think if the outcome had been different, how we'd all be weeping this morning. But definitely a huge boost, I think, to morale, some patriotism as well. And yeah, it's just a game, but I mean, we definitely saw a lot of emotion in this about Canada-U.S. relations. I mean, the crowds in Montreal were not kind to the U.S. anthem, and people making it clear it wasn't about, the U.S. team or the U.S., but about their leadership and what's happening between the two countries. Chantal Kreviazuk last night changed the Canadian national anthem, the beginning of it, to make a statement. So, yeah, I mean, it was more than a game. And it's great to have a win, but I think it also is, it just puts front and center all of the emotion and all of the frustration going back and forth between our two countries for sure. And we won. So there you go.
I think we've shown that majority of the U.S. doesn't like to have their anthem booed, and we've shown that Canada doesn't like being referred to as a 51st state. So,
perhaps perhaps everybody could just sort this
chill out a little bit.
I saw there was a sign at the game last night about the U.S. becoming the 11th province, and
that's right.
The people holding the sign got threatened and challenged to a fight in the video media.
Yeah.
So,
really?
Certainly, going the taste of their own medicine kind of thing. Maybe a little bit of that.
Yeah. So to talk a little, to move away from hockey and talk a bit more about some of the relations side of the equation from an agriculture standpoint. I've had two people this week that have shared documents or proposals or, white papers, however you want to put that, about what Canada needs to do. Okay, so whether we and I am confident that we are going to sort out the situation with the U.S., but just, given the situation and the sort of maybe the awakening or the eye-opening experience that I think it's been for a lot of Canadians, the threat from an economic perspective, here's what Canada needs to do, okay? And there's a lot of the typical, trade infrastructure, innovation funding, regulations, interprovincial trade barriers, all of those things that we've talked about on the show as well. But to overlay they both have the same kind of problem. And in conversations with, I think, a lot of people, the same thing kind of comes up. What we're always missing is the speed component. That's maybe one of the things we need to tackle the most is, and one of our core values at Real Agriculture is the word velocity. And I love that word, but I think, Lyndsey, this is one of the main things that Canada really, no matter what the strategies, what the tactics are, or the places we're going to invest, we need to find some speed and velocity in how we go about our business.
Yeah, I think that overall, and this isn't a new critique, but I think just the amount of sort of underlining of this fact that we have a lot of meetings and not a lot of action. We have a lot of describing a problem and not a lot of solutions actually getting enacted. I think, if we can take this as a incredible encouragement and push to do the things that we know need to get done and just do them. We just, as a nation, apparently love to meet about things, talk about things, but we don't do things. We have to just go out there and actually get it done. So this week, and it'll be on RealAgriculture.com shortly, I did talk to Tyler McCann, who of course is on this issues panel, talking about Cappy's research paper, and that really was the underlining point. And Tyler shared a quote that let's not waste a good crisis, that realistically, it's the action that has to happen now. And not to take 4 years to plan something or, an entire year to decide on what we're going to do, but actually take action and actually move things forward and get things done. And that's going to take perhaps a change of attitude, a change of, this idea that, like when we talk interprovincial trade, et cetera, like there has to be an appetite to want to find where we can move forward. And we haven't always had that. But I think ultimately we have to kind of get over ourselves, and we're going to have to think forward and think action and think velocity, because there are opportunities. There are also threats, and we've got to actually meet them in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Kelvin, we're starting to see, there's a story in the Wall Street Journal about a trucking company moving their headquarters from Canada to the U.S., substantial one that's publicly traded. We've got Nutrien talking about the concern they have for increasing cost on the farmer if fertilizer tariffs are put into place, and of course they've got a potash interest there going from Canada to the U.S. But Josh Linville from StoneX interviewed him this week at Top Producer. We're going to play that next week on the show. One of the things he talked about, we focused a lot on potash, but what about the reciprocal tariffs or the retaliatory tariffs Canada was going to put in place, and it was going to increase the cost of phosphate on the Canadian farmer. So we're starting to hear a lot more about
tariffs.
this.
As well as what happens to the Canadian currency and our buying power on the Canadian side of the border. If our currency tanks further, that certainly will make fertilizer imports more expensive as well. And I'd add to the list, we saw Stellantis this week, news of a pause in Jeep production in Brampton, Ontario. Certainly a troubling sign of what could be to come if this atmosphere continues with the tariff threat hanging over the Canadian economy.
One of my takeaways from Top Producer Summit this week was in talking to people that have a very decent exposure to the Trump ecosystem is there's a lot of people applying what happened in the first Trump administration from a tariff and trade perspective, applying that strategy and outcome to the 2.0 version. And what I took from this week, people I really trust, is do not make that assumption. American farmers are making that mistake. Industry's making that mistake. Oh, it's a negotiation tactic. Oh, it's this. I did not hear that this week. Now, some people are still saying it, but that's more of like a justification or an excuse, so to speak. The reality is that, Kelvin, you've talked a lot about this structural change that is at work here that they are attempting.
Yeah, exactly. In terms of addressing the trade deficit, in terms of raising revenue to replace taxes on the cuts to income tax side of things, funding U.S. government. This is about, there's a lot of big thinkers and influential thinkers around Trump and in his orbit right now that see this as structural change, not necessarily about just the small amount of fentanyl coming from Canada and fentanyl precursors. I know there are issues there, but it's about bigger things. And again, I encourage everyone to read Robert Lighthizer book about what's it called again? No Trade is Free, I believe.
Yeah.
It lays out a lot of the thinking behind these decisions and why this tariff threat is certainly something I think the Canadian government and Canadian businesses should all have high level of awareness of how serious this is, and it's about the long term. This isn't about the short term, and so it means planning differently if we're looking at a long term scenario like this.
Hey, for every acre, every row, every seed, precision wins every time. Only Seedmaster delivers unmatched accuracy for better yields and bigger profits. Seedmaster, driven by precision, leading the way in seeding innovation. We got more coming up here on RealAg Radio right after this.
Co-op knows your community because we live here too. Our teams are your trusted partners with a range of expertise to help support your entire farm operation. And we're giving back. In the past 5 years, Co-op has invested over $1.1 billion in the prairies through building, upgrading, and expanding local facilities. And we've returned over $1.17 billion to Co-op members in the prairies. Co-op, we're all building something for the future. Here for your farm, here for your family. Learn more at coop.crs/farm.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
All this talk about trade and tariffs and economics, it's definitely the topics of the day. Definitely something to be discussed at this year's Canadian Crops Convention. It's going to be happening in Edmonton from March 4th through the 6th. This year's theme is Navigating Our Future and includes a fantastic lineup of knowledgeable speakers and great networking opportunities. Check out what the Canola Council of Canada and the Canada Grains Council have planned. And you can also register at canadiancrops.ca. And Kelvin, one of the speakers at that convention, is going to be former Prime Minister Stephen Harper. He also has penned an opinion column that I believe, now this is uncommon. It was in the Post and in the Globe.
Yeah, we don't usually see editorial. It's interesting that they both chose to publish it because we don't usually see editorials published in those competing national papers. But and certainly saying that Canada needs to take action further to what Lyndsey was talking about last segment. Canada needs to take action, and we need to move ahead on a bunch of things that we've been talking about for a long time, and some of that includes not increasing dependency on the U.S. market. It includes finding friends elsewhere in the world at this time.
Well, it didn't, but easier said than done, my friend. That's I heard a lot this week about at Top Producer was about it was Senator Roger Marshall from Kansas who did the fireside chat with USDA Secretary Brooke Rollins, who said, and she agreed with him, that India will be a bigger market for the U.S. than China. And I asked a few people after that. I'm providing my Canadian lens, a little bit skeptical to that. India is a nasty situation to steer through in terms of protectionism and tariffs and import quotas and all that kind of stuff. China seems a lot more straightforward. I think there's a little bit of naivety there when it comes to what India potentially is as a trading partner.
I'll just quickly comment. I'm not sure if you want Lyndsey to, but to me the scenario where India is a greater trading partner than China is if the conflict between China and the U.S. escalates. Mm-hmm. If that reaches tension, Cold War like tension, or even worse, then I think that's where India is the next biggest market, or is the most popular country.
Well, Lyndsey, we heard about this. My concern, Lindsey, is Jim McCormick from agmarket.net, who's on Wednesday's show. Softness in demand in China. Yeah. Things are not good there, and boy, that is ill-timed with what we're going to see between the U.S. and China, the Phase 1 2.0 kind of deal.
And that's what I was going to say is that there's the diplomatic trade relations between China and the U.S. There's also just the economic reality of the Chinese market. And I think that is at least partially, and it is correct, that India economically likely has much more upside potential right now. Sure. And that looks like to, say, a U.S. or even to Canada, that is a market opportunity, right? That is a country, if they've got money, if they're buying, great. But to your point, Shaun, I mean, Canada does send a lot of stuff to India, and it is a very difficult relationship to navigate. It is a country that is very protectionist. Their tariffs go on, tariffs come off, based on what they need. There's a lot of government involvement with a lot of what comes in and out of that country. And so realistically, while it may be, at least for the foreseeable future, the bigger opportunity as far as the sound economics, it doesn't mean it's necessarily a slam dunk like, oh, we'll just send it to India. It's just not how it works. So I see where the thought process is. I just don't know if it's that simple.
I don't care if you're in Canada or the U.S. I think one of the concerns heading into 2025 still is on the farming broadacre row crop side of the equation, Lyndsey, is still farm profitability, even with the commodity markets lifting here to a certain extent since about the middle of November. Farm profitability is still the issue.
Right. And I mean, I don't know if from the Canadian perspective, perhaps even more so, just if only because we have so much of this uncertainty, but at the same time, a lot of that is shared with across the North American market. Like, we deal with many of the same, commodities and price shifts, and everything influences each other. But the profitability question this year, it's not an easy one to answer as to the decisions that you can make. And it does sort of feel like, we talk all about all this action, et cetera, but there's only so much you can do when, prices are what they are. And whether that's high input prices and low commodity prices, I mean, yes, you've got to make really sound decisions, make sure you're focused on ROI, make sure you're focused on profitability, not just on yield. But at the same time, it's super difficult to pencil things out at times. And there's not a lot we can change about that.
I wonder if a lot of farmers, though, Kelvin, aren't sort of like what we've heard out of Ed Brzezinski from Cargill. We had him on the show last week. We were talking about canola markets. And we talk about tariffs. He's like, it's so uncertain and the probabilities are so messed up in what actually happens here. It's hard to factor it into your analysis and your predictions on the movement of the market. So you almost have to just push it aside, kind of like. We don't suggest stick your head in the sand very often around here, but Ed kind of said you almost got to stick your head in the sand on it because you really don't know. And I wonder if a lot of farmers are thinking that way too. Although farmers are concerned in Canada about a potential trade war with the U.S., if we look at the American farmer, Purdue has some data out from their January sentiment index where it talks, or a barometer, their ag barometer, it talks about how American farmers are less likely to believe in a trade war with other countries and seeing a decrease in exports than they did say in November and December, which I found kind of interesting. We're getting kind of maybe numb to this conversation a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And you even look to the Bank of Canada. The central bank is kind of taking the same approach when it comes to the tariffs and doing its scenario analysis as well. It's basically saying we can't factor this in terms of what our rates are here because we don't know. There's so many unknowns and it's such a wide swing in terms, like you said, the probabilities. And yeah, I think many farmers are taking that approach, but at the same time, the one thing farmers can do is lock it, take some risk off the table if there are prices that are okay. And I think there is probably some more forward. It'd be interesting to ask or survey: has there been more forward selling on the 25 crop than in the past or the last couple of years? Just based on some of that risk that is on the table and the uncertainty as to I can get that price now, I can lock that in, know what I can sleep at night knowing it's not going to lose 20% or 30% if tariffs come on, or in some cases we may actually see higher prices north of the border if there's less U.S. corn coming into Canada. Maybe domestic corn market might actually see a bounce higher, much to the chagrin of what the livestock producers would like to see. So yeah, so much uncertainty, so many different scenarios right now that I think if you can take risk off the table and see some profitability on it, do it, or at least protect margins. But like you said, it's almost impossible to predict.
Yeah, fascinating. I tried to get an idea from Marlon Suderman this week from StoneX, and we mentioned Jim McCormick from agmarket.net. Where do we go from here on this on the futures prices, right? And that's a whole, like, is this a lot of short covering happening by the funds that's lifted us higher? Are there actual fundamentals in place, especially with that softness in China? We are going to see a lot more corn planted in the U.S., relatively speaking, to last year and the year before. So there's a lot of dynamics here at work. 2025, although farmers are identifying it as a more risky year than 24, it is going to be incredibly fascinating to watch all this unfold. And I had big thumbs up to everybody trying to navigate through this. And sorry, Kelvin, you're going to say something.
I was just going to quickly say, I think there's also a mental health component to this too, or mental wellness aspect to it, where our bandwidth, we don't have the bandwidth as individuals to digest all this information. And so I think some of this is also just a coping strategy or a way of navigating through a situation like this, kind of walking by faith kind of thing. So it's kind of, we have no choice. We can't with the roller coaster of news coming from Truth Social and other places, I think in many cases farmers are it's not a head in the sand as much as this is what's required to get through this kind of thing and be excited about today and tomorrow.
Well, I watched Josh Linville's presentation. He closed the meeting, and I'll tell you, he had a lot of bad scenarios. He was a little bit more positive in our interview, I found. On stage, he gave a lot of very negative scenarios on what happens in the fertilizer market. If this happens, then this. It was very concerning.
And if I may, that it is the one thing that, the U.S. is making, their leadership is making decisions for the U.S. for all these reasons, and they can. This is what the administration is doing. But that doesn't insulate them from global realities, right? And that is, I think, the important thing here. That and to Kelvin's point for each individual trying to navigate through this, is that you can change what you want within your own borders, but realistically, we still work in global markets, and the impacts of those global markets are still going to be felt regardless.
Hey, maximize productivity and profitability with an innovative, all-in-one approach to farming, combining accounting, business planning, agronomic field planning, and advanced technology. MNP Ag Intellect delivers personalized solutions that empower you to make confident, data-driven decisions. Visit mnp.ca today to learn more. We've got more coming up here on the RealAg Issues Panel. Shaun Haney, Lyndsey Smith, Kelvin Heppner, back after. Lima Grain Cereal Seed brings you best-in-class performance for winter and spring wheat, including 12 national wheat yield contest winners in 2024. With the most extensive coaxium portfolio and over 15 top-performing varieties, Lima Grain delivers superior genetics to control grassy weeds when you need it, fall or spring. Boost your yield potential today. Visit limagraincerealseeds.com or call your LCS Regional Commercial Manager for more info.
Before you get back in the field this year, spend some time with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Get all the information you need on hybrid selection, planting depth, crop inputs, and more from a wide range of industry experts. A massive library of video content is available on demand when you need it most. Spend your time outside of the field, inside the classroom, with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147. Hey, listen, all you Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, and northern Minnesota growers, there's this cool program, the New Seed Omega-3 Canola Production System. It can help unlock a guaranteed path to market with attractive premium opportunities, first-in-class agronomy support, I should say, and free on-farm pickup. That's listen, I don't got to worry about getting it to the elevator off my farm. I get actual on-farm pickup. This is awesome right after harvest. To learn more, go to omega3canola.com. Okay, Shaun Haney, Kelvin Heppner, Lyndsey Smith of RealAgriculture talking about the biggest issues of the week. No shortage. Kelvin, let's talk about avian influenza. I would say, and I'm not sure why, but there's a lot more discussion about this topic south of the border than in Canada. Is this story not getting the attention it deserves in Canada? Because it has had major ramifications on the poultry sector. What are your biased thoughts?
Well, my bias is that we've been talking about this since December 2021. December 2021 is when it was first found in Canada. And
we have. So,
yeah, I know. And so there's been a political decision somewhere in the Trump administration, either intentional or not, to raise this issue and talk about, and certainly the egg price coverage has been part of that in terms of driving the political discourse. But yeah, certainly Trump and his press secretary, Egg Secretary Brooke Rollins, have all been talking about egg prices and battling avian influenza over the last number of weeks. And so it is one of the top issues of the Trump administration, or priorities right now. Here in Canada, I agree, we haven't seen as much coverage. Part of that is we haven't seen the escalation in prices due to our supply management system. In some ways, this is where it is at its strongest in terms of the coordination behind the scenes that has resulted in Canadians not seeing the same escalation in prices or availability of supply and that type of thing in the Canadian market. And so that's kind of, I think, where the supply management system shines in moments like this. And so that's maybe why it hasn't been such a political hot potato north of the border.
Okay. But we are seeing, well, I guess, Lyndsey, why is there not more talk about vaccinations for the birds?
Oh, that is, okay, so we did hear this week that Canada did secure 500,000 doses of the vaccine for H5N1 for avian influenza. This is obviously going to be very targeted as far as human. Yes, exactly, because there's two separate issues here, right? So one is vaccinating the humans that will be in close contact with poultry, etc. So half of those doses are going to be targeted towards people that are working with poultry, and then half are going to be essentially held. At this point, public health is not saying that we need to have widespread vaccination for this in humans, but the U.S. is seeing far more human cases than we have. We've only had the one. But then there is the question of vaccines for the poultry as well. And Kelvin, being in the poultry industry, can probably cover this better than I can. But there is it hasn't necessarily come about for a couple very good reasons. I do want to just step back a little bit, though, and just say, like, to Kelvin's point, we have been covering this, at least within Real Agriculture, et cetera. But I get notices every week from Ontario because I signed up for them to say where these events happen. There are quarantines that get into place. There's depopulation that happens, et cetera. But it hasn't necessarily maybe made the mainstream until just recently when, yes, we had a human case in BC. And also we have seen, there's an ostrich farm in BC that's fighting to keep their birds alive where they've had an avian influenza case. So I think, like usual in agriculture, until it sort of affects the average consumer, like with egg prices, et cetera, we don't necessarily talk about it maybe as much as we should. I will say I'm just thankful we aren't firing a whole bunch of our staff in CFIA during this time. Just going to put that out there because USDA, accidentally, quote unquote, laid off a whole bunch of people. And hire them back. So, that is a whole other ball of wax. But anyway, the vaccine side, we do have human vaccine now. In Canada, there is a plan there to protect the people that are in close contact. Kelvin,
I
think it's a really important point that we speak to the bird side of it.
So it is a question that I ask as a poultry producer, why we don't have a vaccine yet. And the main reasons, I believe, at least these are the hurdles that need to be overcome, are we need an effective vaccine, and so there needs to be the research done and development done and we know with flu vaccines it's a moving target in terms of developing that effective product to give to birds. The bigger obstacle, though, is trade, as it potentially shuts out all exports. Like if the U.S. starts vaccinating their chickens, unless they come to agreements with export markets to accept those eggs or that meat, there's a potential for export markets being shut.
So why do we care about that, though? Are we concerned about the export market for poultry?
Not as much as the U.S. Certainly not as much as the U.S. But yeah, Canada's not going to go at it alone. Our poultry market is still somewhat integrated with the U.S. even with our supply management system. We buy a lot of our day-old chicks, breeder stock come from the U.S. And other things like that. So as soon as you introduce the vaccine into a market, those birds essentially can test positive for this virus, and it's impossible at this moment to tell whether they've had a natural exposure to it, to this highly pathogenic virus, or whether it's been through a vaccination. And that's where trade, there needs to be negotiations between countries in terms of figuring out the trade side of things to keep export markets open. Mm-hmm. And that is what I think the Trump administration, where Brooke Rollins is going to be focusing on efforts there in terms of driving the possibility. So the USDA has now approved conditionally vaccine for birds. It's conditional, and so there's a limited time frame they can use it, and it's not for commercial use yet. It's basically just for testing at this point still. So it's still a long ways from helping change the policy or approach being a real tool in the toolbox for the American poultry industry. And I think if the U.S. moves ahead on it, Canada won't be far behind.
I think they're going to muscle their way to it too. I think that's what we're going to see is, hey, you don't want to.
The U.S. has that muscle.
They have the muscle, right? So you don't want to take our poultry, country XYZ. Well, unfortunately, we're going to do this to you now. and push them in that direction. I think that's one of the strategies we're going to see. But
yeah, agreed.
Okay, this week we had the exclusive. We broke the news that there's a new organization out there to advocate for biofuels, Lyndsey. It is the Farm and Fuel Alliance.
Yeah.
FFA.
Yeah, Farms and Fuel Alliance. There are some other FFAs out there, so don't confuse them, please.
Don't confuse them.
Yeah, that's right. But we did see, so this is 2 ethanol companies and Grain Farmers of Ontario founding this alliance. They are, though, open to other members as well. So they've founded this alliance, but this is sort of the beginning, and of course are inviting interested parties to join this alliance as well, really with a focus on policy, breaking down barriers, making sure that ethanol markets stay vibrant and productive for Canadian growers and Canadian ethanol processors. So, so Farms and Fuel Alliance.
Yeah, and sort of a little bit of I would say a little bit more of an American flair to advocating for the renewables industry, specifically ethanol in this case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I would say so. With the, having the 2 companies and a producer group sort of involved is it's a little more sort of industry driven, and sort of from the business side versus, government driven. So yeah, I would say probably that. I don't know. It's an interesting take on, or I find it interesting as someone in Ontario, and Grain Farmers of Ontario. I mean, ethanol it's fuel, and it's a very important part of the corn industry in Ontario. And sometimes I don't know that people entirely realize that or understand just how big of an industry it is for, especially Ontario growers, but corn growers in general. So,
well, and again, we're talking about fixing Canada's stuff at the beginning.
Right.
Canada's a large importer of U.S. ethanol, and clearly there's demand for ethanol. And so, it's not saying we shouldn't be in, hey, it's a good purchase and it's close and logistically it fits. It doesn't mean that we can't have a strong domestic industry as well. And at times it feels like the government and some of the attitudes out there is that, whatever, we'll just import instead of producing any here at home. So, Kelvin, sorry, go ahead.
I've long wondered why we don't have the equivalent Canadian kind of equivalent to the RFA in Canada. Yeah. And I guess this is, to use Tyler's line that you referenced earlier, Lyndsey, in terms of don't let a crisis go wasted kind of thing. It's about the timing here in terms of made in Canada ethanol being important and potentially having value and political will to move ahead in terms of made in Canada ethanol going forward. I think that's probably some of what's behind the impetus for striking this alliance right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, we're out of time here on Rural Radio 147 Sirius XM. I do appreciate everybody listening. That was Lyndsey Smith, Kelvin Heppner, both of RealAgriculture. We're going to have a bonus segment today because I got to ask them, are we going to see a DOGE equivalent in Canada? Could we see big budgetary cuts going forward at departments like AAFC? And should we? What does that look like, especially at PMRA? There's a lot of concern this week in the U.S., a top producer, about what happens at EPA with some of the cuts and trying to get products registered. Could EPA be actually slower than PMRA? Oh, imagine that. If you have any feedback on today's show, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or you can, of course, call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Thanks for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this RealAg Radio podcast episode brought to you by Authority Strike Herbicide from FMC. Tackle tough weeds like kochia, cleavers, Russian thistle, and pigweed with the dual power of 2 Group 14 modes of action. Visit your local retailer today or visit ag.fmc.com/ca to find out more.
Okay, here we are for the bonus part of the program. For those of you that are just so kind to download the RealAg Radio podcast, we do appreciate it. As I've been mentioning for the past number of weeks, podcast downloads continue to climb. Love it. And because we had such a great hockey game last night, we can use the hockey stick reference. Absolutely. People know what we're talking about now that everyone's favorite new sport is hockey. Actually, a top producer, there was a graph I showed in my concurrent session, which was, you kind of realize how maybe I got to find a different reference, but one of the colors on the graph was like a teal. I said, it's like a San Jose Shark kind of color. I looked back at the crowd. Okay, yeah, you don't know what I'm talking about. So we'll maybe come up with something else there. Indeed.
Jacksonville Jaguars, or
yeah, with the sort of the Jacksonville Jaguar kind of color, a little bit different, but in that vicinity for sure. One of the topics we didn't get time to get to today, I'm curious what you think is the media coverage of DOGE is kind of fascinating because it's a very different way of running or doing things from a government spending perspective. There's a lot of things at work here. There has been a lot of cuts of probationary workers. Now, a probationary worker is somebody that has had that job for less than 2 years. It's not necessarily a new worker. It also can factor in, it's netting in people that maybe got a promotion 6 months ago. They are technically a probationary worker, and so then also in the bullseye. So if you were like maybe an underperforming worker that had been in the same role for 5 years or 10 years or something like that, you may not get cut. It is kind of it is interesting to watch as an outsider. There's been substantial cuts to USDA. There's cuts at EPA. There's cuts really across the board, and there's probably more to come. I was in the room during the AgriTalk interview with USDA Secretary Brooke Rollins, where she defended the cuts that have been made, and she said, I signed off on them. We are going to sit here and we're going to now get our arms around it, as she puts, and we're going to see where we go from here. Sort of some of the media colleagues in the room took that as there's more cuts coming. Is this the kind of budget cuts or people cuts, staff cuts, Kelvin, that we can expect at AFC if we have a government change going forward as we get a little bit more focused on reducing that deficit?
I definitely think the Polyev conservatives have been planning cuts, and they've talked repeatedly, and behind the scenes been coming up with plans in terms of reducing government spending and bringing the budget back to balanced. But at the same time, anybody that's been at an Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada facility in the last 10, 20 years knows that it has not been updated in a long time. It is probably running at less than half capacity, and certainly I think the Canadian situation and this is a factor of how the American political system and Canadian political system differ, where American agriculture has much more political clout. You've got the Farm Bill process every 4 or 5 years. You have the world reserve currency and trillions of dollars of deficit spending. USDA has a lot more bloat, I think, has room to cut than Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. I think in AFC there will be some effort. There will definitely be some streamlining and cuts if we see a conservative government, but I don't think we nearly have the same amount of bloat. It's already pretty lean in a lot of areas. There's going to be specific programs. The seed breeding side of things is something I think we're going to have to pay close attention to, and there will be other areas too on the business risk management side of things. But I think in Canada our government's been running on the agriculture side of things, not necessarily in other areas, but in agriculture, it's been pretty lean already for the last while. We haven't seen increases in spending in the ag policy frameworks and that type of thing for many years.
Yeah, Lyndsey, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, perhaps not surprisingly, really agree that realistically, much of what Ag Canada is sort of in charge of has essentially just been left to sort of erode. And yeah, we haven't seen a lot of investment in the department or a lot of expansion. Certainly, yes, we see some new projects, some new funding through the ag policy framework, et cetera, that, this current government has certainly had a focus on, whether it's the Living Labs initiative and the OFCAF funding, that sort of stuff. But like realistically, as far as large dollar figures, now, granted, perhaps on the bureaucracy side, there's been some additions, I'm sure, as we've seen the entire public service grow, but there isn't a lot of fat to trim. Let's be honest. I think we will see a change in direction, of course, if we see this change in government that is still, being polled, that is going to happen. But as far as where I think the government plans to, or the potential conservative government plans to find a whole bunch of savings, it probably won't be in Ag Canada. At the same time, I can't imagine they're about to spend a whole bunch more money in it. So let's be realistic here.
I wonder, so what both of you are saying makes total sense. And I'm not saying I don't believe you, but what you're saying is the same narrative people were saying in the U.S. When DOGE started. was that, they overstated. There's not a lot of cuts. Where are they going to go? If you look at, the defense budget, if you look at all these different things, there's really not a lot of room. And their budget, their target of what they could cut is way overstated. I don't know if they're going to get to that goal, but they have definitely cut way more and been way more aggressive and less emotional than I think anybody thought. So that's why I asked the question.
But they've also brought in Elon Musk, who has basically been tasked to do this. So frankly, I don't foresee that happening in Canada. So, and maybe I'm wrong. And I'm not saying Elon specifically, I'm saying that kind of role.
Right.
I mean, we don't have that, and I don't see any plans to do it. And realistically, I think that is the reason we're seeing this boulder of a tool. It's not even a hammer. It's just a boulder of just smash and get rid of and then deal with the fallout. It's after. And it's someone outside of government, right, that has come in to do it. And we just don't have that, or I don't see a plan for it within the Canadian government.
Kelvin?
To continue with the avian reference, the chickens haven't come home to roost yet either with all the cuts in the U.S. and Polyev here in Canada. I wonder whether the capacity for a Conservative government to make cuts is reduced with what's happening south of the border because of the potential impact on the Canadian economy. And also there's all kinds of research in scientific areas where Canada and the U.S. work together. And if the U.S. is cutting, say, their National Weather Service and our weather forecasting, North American overall becomes poorer. We can't work together, share radar. Maybe U.S. doesn't support the same technology that they have in the past. Maybe Environment Canada can't see as many cuts because of cuts to the National Weather Service, that kind of thing. Yeah. So I wonder whether some of the capacity north of the border, the cuts that the Conservatives potentially have penciled in their plans behind the scenes, I wonder whether they have to rethink some of those going forward too.
Yeah, I kind of described it this week when I was on the panel with Margie Eckelkamp and Ken Zuckerberg from CHS. I described it. It's a blunt, very, very, very blunt instrument. It is not a precision tool as maybe described. It is a very blunt and also, earlier in the show today, we were, I brought up the fact that Canada needs to show more speed, more velocity. This is speed and velocity in like a hyperbolic state.
Yeah. These were not intelligent, well thought out cuts. This was exactly that. This was in the olden days of newspapers, this was cutting from the bottom. Right? Whatever in the story is extra, if for column inches, you just cut from the bottom. Having a blunt tool of like anyone who's been here less than, etc., boom, gone. Like, so as we said, with some of these researchers on the avian influenza side, some of the scientists having to be hired back because whoops, we got rid of the wrong people. This is not an intelligent way to do this, but it is effective.
Okay, hold on. There is hundreds of millions of dollars that they had, to be fair, have identified as like waste,
sure,
and like dumb.
Yes, but that it was actually identified. It wasn't just taking a timeline and going, yeah.
And you got to do it quickly though, because otherwise it doesn't work. I'll use an analogy. When we moved to our farm here, we moved to the farm that my parents had previously, and my dad's side of the yard has a lot of old equipment and stuff that we're saving for parts and stuff like that. When we moved here, if I'd cleaned it up right away, it would have been a lot easier than 7 years later, where now I realize, hey, this actually is doing this and this has this value and that kind of thing. It would have been a lot easier to have cleaned up the yard and all our old equipment in the tree lines in the first few months than it is 7 years later. And I think the same thing applies to government. And I think Polyev and the Conservatives are planning to be quick in terms of some of these cuts. So that's where, it'll be interesting to watch, assuming the polls are well, and we're seeing, again, some polls showing mixed messages this week in terms of what a federal election result could be. So we'll see.
Yeah, farmer reaction to it this week, and this is, again, anecdotal on my part, just having conversations with U.S. farmers in the hallway at Top Producer, was so concern about cuts at EPA and USDA. I understand, like, more the long term, I wonder where this is going. Mm-hmm. Also, the arguing of putting some programming back in place because it shouldn't have been cut. But there seems to be more anger and disappointment with Congress in all of this. That there's clearly a lack of oversight from Democrats and Republicans in Congress about where money was being spent. Mm-hmm. That's a common thing I heard back was, I'm I am concerned, or I need to understand more about what Elon and DOGE is doing. But I'll tell you what, I know one thing: Congress hasn't been doing his job, and of course some of those stories get inflated, and there's one example that's given that's repeated over and over and over and over again. But that would be the sentiment that I kind of heard this week in Kansas City as well. And like you think about EPA, like a lot of times from a PMRA perspective, we talk about getting products registered in Canada, how slow it is. Okay, now some of that is lack of resourcing, some of that's just pure bureaucratic fog. And a lot of times we'll use comparisons to in the U.S. as far as how this product's been registered in the U.S. for 6 years, and we're still not through the trial in Canada. But if some of these cuts take action, lay out like it looks like they're intended, that could slow down the registration processes in the U.S., which that's a disadvantage to the U.S. farmer, and that's where they start to squawk and get mad when it actually really impacts their farm. So.
And it could affect availability of technology in Canada too. If we've been harmonization of regulatory practices and approval has been something that we've wanted in Canada for decades in terms of the Canada-U.S. relationship, thinning that border on new technologies. And if all of a sudden RFK is restricting access to some technologies or not allowing certain things to come forward, then all of a sudden harmonization isn't so beneficial to Canadian agriculture.
Yeah, sorry. I think we talked about this maybe. We've had so many conversations about all this, but if somebody's not going to bring a product to market in the U.S. and there's 90 million acres of corn, sorry, Canada, they're not bringing it to Canada.
What?
I am going to go somewhere else, Brazil, South America. I'll have other plans because Canada gets product. Canada gets products because of the adjacency and the similar type systems to the United States.
Not because of our own economic clout.
Well,
Let's
maybe
put it that way.
With wheat, 20 million acres of wheat, that's substantial. But when we're talking about something like corn, for example, I think corn's a really good example because of the differences in scale.
Yeah,
and size. So, where are you guys off to next week?
We're at Ottawa. Kelvin's coming to see me.
Right. You're at the CFA annual meeting.
Yeah, Tuesday, right, Kelvin? Let's hope it's Tuesday. That's the day I'm planning.
Wednesday morning.
Lyndsey,
it's Wednesday. Okay.
It's Wednesday.
Yeah, it's Wednesday morning. We're hosting a panel.
I knew that.
Yes, it's okay. I'm just trying to make Kelvin freak out.
I'm coming in Tuesday, so I hope to attend the CFA president's reception and see some friends in town, and then we're doing the radio show Wednesday morning. A panel on disaster response, insurance, the future of that, and kind of looking at how government, insurance providers, and farmers can work together to with increasing cost of insurance and risk all around how we navigate this going forward. So looking forward to that.
Yeah,
yes.
Well, there's definitely risk in the air. There's no question about it.
There's also risk because it's Lyndsey and I's first. It'll be the first time Lyndsey and I have done this type of thing. So
usually it's Shaun that does it. But
it's a lot of fun.
I told Kelvin I'm just the hype person. I'm just going to get the crowd going and then hand it over.
You're going to ask the tough questions. I'll just.
It'll be fun. I'm looking forward to seeing everybody there as well.
I'm in Crossfield on Tuesday, I believe, speaking to at a vet meeting to a bunch of ranchers. And then on Wednesday, I'm in Brandon, Manitoba, speaking at a Cargill Market Sense event. The after dinner speaker.
Duck.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that. So, and then it's like USDA has their big update on Thursday, Friday, which I'm not going to. I'm going to try to do virtually. And then we're like only a week away from Commodity Classic. Where's Commodity Classic start next week?
The week after.
Yeah.
Yep. I know.
Sunday.
Next Saturday is March 1st.
What is going? We've
almost made it, guys. We've almost made it.
My vehicle. So here, I said this to a friend outside of agriculture yesterday. We were just chatting about baseball, and he's like, where you been and where are you doing? And I said, well, I'm coming back to Calgary on Sunday, on Monday. And we're talking about it. And I said, my vehicle has been parked at the Calgary airport for 5 weeks. I hope it's still there. He's like, you're going to be missing a Cadillac converter. You'll be lucky if you have tires.
Yeah, exactly. Oh goodness.
They're talking about. Sorry, what's that?
The joke is sometimes it's cheaper to get your vehicle towed and then
yes, then pay the parking.
I do remember what row I'm in, so that's an important.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, I do.
Maybe next time just Uber from Lethbridge. It's probably cheaper.
It might be, but they give you a monthly rate. Like I'm at one of the park and
long
park
term
and flies thing, the long term ones. So they do give you a monthly rate, but it will. It's had quite a sleepover. It's pretty much a resident of that parking lot at this point. The way that. Yeah.
Let us know if it's still there when you get there.
We will, and then we're dropping it off again on Friday when we head to Kamani Classic. So I was talking to Eric Snodgrass, who great weather meteorologist, and he talked about how he's forecasting a big dump of snow for Denver for Commodity Classic weekend.
Yeah. Good luck, everybody.
When Denver gets spring snow, it's sort of like Calgary. You start to get like snow at this time of the year. It is big. It is heavy.
Heavy and wet and slushy.
Feet of snow, he said.
Yeah. Okay. Enjoy your time, everybody.
Bern and I are going to have a great time.
You are. You're going to have a great time.
It's going to be fantastic. Okay. Two of you have a great weekend, okay?
You as well, and everyone else.
Take care, everyone.
Yeah, appreciate everybody downloading the RealAg Radio podcast. Please continue to tell your friends, your family, your peers, your enemies. I really don't care. Just tell somebody about RealAg Radio and how it is one of your sources for all things agricultural news. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio.